Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Parent University. Thank you for joining us this evening. Parent University seeks to engage and inform parents and guardians as they support their children's academic success. Through sessions and events that are fun, interactive, and informative, we'll explore topics that are important to students and their families and learn from experts and each other, engaging in open dialogue and building our communities. And now I thank you for your time, and I will turn it over to Erin Townsend, the Assistant Superintendent of School Management.
Thank you very much, Nanette, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We are excited to share this presentation with you this evening to learn about the work we're doing to continue to promote a safe and inclusive environment in all of our schools. Our goals for tonight are to talk about our commitments as a school district to safe and equitable schools, to help define what constitutes harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment within the district, how to report an incident, and to clarify what happens after someone reports. And then finally, what else we are doing within the district to prevent discrimination and harassment from happening at all. I am excited to be joined this evening by two of our wonderful staff folks that are working on these issues with us. So in just a moment, Kate Brogan, our district ombudsperson, will walk us through some of the elements of the policy. So thank you, Kate, for being with us tonight. And really appreciate Emma Senden, who works at Portland High School as both the JMG specialist with JMG as Jobs for Maine Graduates, and, as we'll describe later, is one of the discrimination and harassment liaisons at the school. These are new positions that we have established at all of our secondary schools to support making it easy for students and staff to report incidents of discrimination and harassment for students. So, and again, I'm Erin Townsend, Assistant Superintendent of School Management. So this work is at the core of our Portland Promise that ties together all of the different goals, particularly our equity goal. The equity goal calls on us to kind of identify and remove and dismantle barriers that are prohibiting or impeding students being able to participate in school and succeed and thrive. We recognize that issues of discrimination and harassment are some of the most significant issues students could face during their time at school that might prevent them from being successful. In the fall of 2019, a group of community activists called upon us to step back and take a look at our policy of harassment, discrimination, and sexual harassment for students, and to really think about how we could make it easier to support students who have had these experiences in our schools. We worked with this coalition of community groups for over a year, even through the pandemic, to develop a new policy whose goals are to help make it easier to report when incidents occur, to be able to have timely and clear investigations, and to be able to support communication with the parties involved in an incident, and to be able to connect with various other district work and student leadership to ensure that we're creating climates in which these kinds of incidents happen less and less frequently, and students are able to experience school as a safe and welcoming place for all. The school board, following that work, the school board passed our new policy in the fall of 2020, so just over a year ago. During this past year, we have been working to build capacity to be able to change both the practices and support the culture change to be able to ensure that we are responding effectively to these issues. During this time, following, in the summer of 2020, following the murder of George Floyd and during the Black Lives Matter protests, we heard directly from students through various social media posts about experiences that they had had while they were students with us. So our work here, the establishment of Ms. Brogan's position, the ombudsperson, our liaisons, and our commitments to developing and implementing this policy are in response to those student voices and to the issues that were surfaced in that time. So we are excited to be in the midst of our first full year of implementation. And we look forward to sharing tonight with you all as families what the elements of this policy are and how this can support you and your students and our community to make sure we have a safe and welcoming environment for all students throughout their time in Portland Public Schools. With that, I'd like to introduce Ms. Kate Brogan, our district ombudsperson, to walk us through some of the key elements of the policy to make sure that everybody understands what their rights are as students and families within our district. Kate?
Thanks, Aaron. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Brogan. I am the district ombudsperson for discrimination and harassment issues. I have been here with Portland Public Schools for exactly 5 months today. My role is to help to build the systems that will implement this policy and help families and students navigate the process of reporting times that they've experienced discrimination and harassment, sexual harassment, and also to help to build our capacity to prevent those behaviors in the future. All of this work is built upon this policy of the Portland Public Schools, which, as Aaron said, was significantly revised in the fall of 2020. The policy, as revised, states that all students have the right to attend school free from discrimination and harassment, including sexual harassment, assault, and misconduct based on their membership in a protected category. So this is really all about behaviors that are based in bias, as opposed to bullying behaviors. These behaviors are really happening because of a person's race or color or sex or sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ancestry or national origin, language, genetic information, pregnancy or family status, and disability. So this provides some protections for students who are experiencing bias, either from other students or from staff of Portland Public Schools or from the school institution itself. And an important first step here is to help students and their families understand what are discrimination and harassment and sexual harassment, and how do they present themselves in school settings. So the policy lays out some definitions. Discrimination is really an issue of how is the school or the school district treating students. It is about intentionally or unintentionally treating individuals differently because of their membership in a protected class. And that can be things like differences in access to classes, differences in access to extracurricular and athletic activities. It can include differences in the way that discipline is imposed. including the severity of consequences. And I think that we've heard it has been a persistent problem across the country that there can be a racial bias in the way that discipline is imposed. And that's something that we want to take very seriously and are always on the lookout for. Similarly, differences in the application of school policies, such as dress code. Our students in different classes, different groups, being held to the same standards for things like dress codes and where they hang out after school. Those are the things that we're paying attention to when we think about discrimination. The next slide talks about harassment. Harassment can happen between students. It can happen between a staff member and a student. And it's really language, conduct that has a negative impact or interferes with a person's ability to participate in school. It can create a hostile, intimidating, or offensive environment. That can include really overt activity, like threats or using hate speech. It can also include microaggressions, which are have in the past been small behaviors or words or jokes that have in the past just been tolerated. But we know that students in protected classes experience these microaggressions every day, and it has an effect on their ability to feel safe and welcome at school. And it's important that we address those kinds of behaviors, regardless of who's doing it. Within the issue of harassment, we pay specific attention to sexual harassment, and that includes behaviors such as comments about people's bodies, touching people inappropriately, spreading rumors. It also includes, the definition also includes, more dramatic issues like sexual assault, sexual coercion, whether that coercion is happening between students or between a staff member and a student. And I think it's important when we're talking about sexual harassment that the policy specifically says that behavior that happens within school is covered, but what's also covered is behavior that happens outside of school for all of these conducts. Behavior that happens outside of school that has an effect on a student's ability to be safe at school and to access the benefits of school. So things that are happening outside of school, particularly on social media, is what we're seeing, can be covered by this policy if it affects people's abilities to feel safe and participate in school. This graphic here, there are 3 different levels of law and policy that specifically prohibit sexual harassment. Federal Title IX is federal law that prohibits sexual harassment and discrimination in schools. That's very specific, pretty high standard to meet to be a violation of Title IX. A broader definition of sexual harassment is prohibited by Maine law and Maine regulations. And then even broader than that is the policy of Portland Public Schools. So there are behaviors or conduct that wouldn't necessarily violate state or federal law, and it's still prohibited in Portland schools, which, those are technical issues. Students don't need to know what policy it violates. Students know if it makes them uncomfortable or feel unsafe, and that's enough for us, and we want to follow up on that. So the next question is, if a student is experiencing any of these situations, how do they let somebody know about it? And for this, I'm going to turn this over to Emma Sinden. Emma is a Jobs for Maine graduate specialist at Portland High School, and she is also one of our harassment and discrimination liaisons. And I'm going to let Emma talk about different ways that students and their families and members of the community can report when a student has experienced this kind of conduct.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for everyone being here tonight. Again, my name is Emma. I'm one of two high school level liaisons at Portland High School, and one of many liaisons that are now scattered throughout the district. And in thinking about the role to talk with parents, I almost want to make a weird juxtaposition. It's hard to think about positives when we're dealing with such difficult issues for your children. But one thing I do want to say before I talk about reporting is how enlightening it is to see how empowered and validated our teens can be when they're heard. And oftentimes in our roles, what we found is that just listening and being a supportive ear is what they need, and to hear somebody say it's not okay and that they're safe in our presence. And I just think that that's been a really positive aspect of this role so far. In going along with that, you see three processes here for how to report instances of harassment, discrimination, sexual harassment. The first and perhaps the most important thing to say is, of course, your child may feel comfortable with any staff member at their school, and that's totally great. Our schools are full of amazing social workers, guidance counselors, administrators, teachers, and there's no problem with a student going to any of those people that they feel comfortable with. We as school level liaisons are just sort of another role. We take sort of a collaborative role with everybody in our school. What's nice is that if your student would prefer to speak with somebody who doesn't know them as well, who might be unbiased but works in this work, they can come right to us and we'll get the information to where it needs to go. And thirdly, a student can always go, or a parent can always go directly to Kate, our district ombudsperson, and that is a totally fine process as well. So there's a whole lot of options, which gives students autonomy and choice, which we found is very important. On the next slide, you're actually going to see the district reporting form that we've been working with. And just as a disclaimer, there's always going to be instances where anonymity is not possible, but for what we're hearing, and I would say the majority, a lot of the time anonymity is totally possible. And it just sort of adds another layer of, I would say, power and decision-making for the student, which is a really good thing. The reporting form can be used in multiple ways. I've sat with students and filled it out, the two of us. Students can fill it out by themselves. Parents and students can access it at home. So it's been a really great tool. I'm assuming that we can maybe put it in the chat or send it out. It is also on our websites and pretty easily found, especially if a student goes to school and is just talking with anybody. We all have access to this form, so it's really easily accessed. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, but I'm going to toss it back over to Kate.
Thanks, Emma.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
Kate, let me just show on the website where folks can find the form,
Great.
So that everybody knows, where it is, and we'll definitely can include it in the chat here in a moment. So sorry, let me get out of my presentation. I apologize. So from our home page, always one of the tiles on the district homepage, our current one, is the Student Speak Up button. So you could click here, and as it says here, click to be directed to the new policy website and reporting mechanism. And that would take you to the whole website, which has the reporting form that Emma has described. So you can go through. It's a Google form. It's, again, can be totally anonymous. And it includes translated copies of our policy, and it lists by school all the different resources, so the administrators, social workers, guidance counselors, and liaisons at each school. So as Emma said, at each of our secondary schools, we have people positioned to be able to support students. Again, all staff, whomever somebody is comfortable, they can make those reports too. But we also list out all those different services, as well as a variety of community-based services that folks can also access from our partners.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah.
I think it's important when we're talking about anonymous reporting. What we found from the 5 months, well, more than 5 months now, we started implementing this at the end of the last school year. But what we found is that there are a lot of students who want to tell somebody about what's happened, but don't want anything further done at this point, and don't really want to share who they are. And I think that Emma said it well, that they really want somebody to tell them that it's not okay what's happened to them, and to believe them. So we have had quite a few students who wanted to make a report, but remain anonymous. And we will do everything we can to respect that request to remain anonymous. Unless we in the superintendent's office determine that it's necessary, that we have to do something to protect, the safety of students, or if there is a need to report abuse or neglect for the safety of students. Everybody who works for Portland Public Schools are mandated reporters, and so we would have to report to the Department of Health and Human Services if we believed that a student had been abused. But I think it is important to everyone as we implement this policy that we respect the desires of the students who are reporting about how this will go. We will do everything to let the student make the decisions about what happens next. And that leads us to the next question is what happens when I report? I think that what we are finding is that a lot of people think, well, if I make a report, then automatically there'll be an investigation and people will know. That's absolutely not the case. A report is really just that. It's a report that something has happened to you. When we get a report, the most important thing is to make sure that everybody involved is safe and is supported. So that will be the most immediate step. And we will take whatever steps are necessary to make sure that happens, whether that means keeping students apart, adjusting schedules to make sure that a student won't see somebody who's harassing them, helping people access community supports, whatever really is necessary to make sure that people can be safe at school while we're determining what the next steps are. The policy requires that as soon as any staff member knows about this, they will let their principal know, and will let me know. And again, we will keep everything confidential, and the policy is very clear that there can't be bad consequences for making a report. I think students are very often nervous that they will that reporting will just increase the harassment that they're experiencing or the discrimination that they're experiencing. And the policy is very clear that that won't happen and will, if it does happen, it will result in further consequences. So at that point, the person making the report has a choice. If they just feel like they needed to make a report, but they don't want anything more to happen, we'll respect that. Again, unless it's absolutely necessary for us to take action. If they also have the possibility, the option, to turn that report into a formal complaint and to request an investigation of the conduct. When that happens, there will be an investigation. Most of the time when that's a report of behavior between students, it will continue to take place at the school level with assistant principals and counselors and the staff that know the students best. I am in the loop whenever there has been a report or a complaint made between students. I am in the loop and will talk to students and their parents about what's happening and what their options are. If the report involves the actions of a staff member, if an allegation is made that a staff member is harassing a student or a staff member is discriminating against a student, then we will conduct an investigation, and the superintendent's office will be more involved in that because it involves human resources issues. So if a person makes a complaint and wants an investigation to happen, we will conduct an investigation. When an anonymous report comes in, sometimes the anonymous report comes from the online reporting form. Sometimes it comes through a liaison or a staff member where a student says, I want you to tell people about this, but I don't want you to say who I am. We will do whatever we can to follow up, given what the circumstances are, but we might not have adequate information for a full investigation. We will, once the investigation is complete and a decision has been made as far as consequences and further action, we will keep the complainant, the person who made the complaint, informed. And whatever the decision is, everybody involved have an opportunity, have a right to appeal that decision and get another set of eyes on that decision, and another review of the steps that have been taken. And in addition to the complaint process, and in addition to laying out a more specific process for addressing instances of discrimination and harassment, Portland Public Schools are taking additional steps to prevent discrimination and harassment, and to make our schools more safe and equitable. And here are some of the things that we're doing. With my role, for the first time, Portland Public Schools have a central repository of data about how often this is happening, what kind of discrimination and harassment is happening, and part of my job is to gather all of that data and to report it out. We are already, we're still in the process of formally rolling this out, formally notifying staff and students about all of the components of this policy. But we are still getting many more reports than we have had in the past. And that's certainly not an indication that there is more discrimination and harassment happening in our schools. It's just we're hearing about it more and we're paying more attention to it as a system, which is a very good thing. And I think that, my goal is that this year we will have a baseline of how prevalent this is and how often this happens in our schools. And then it's likely that for the next year or two, that number will increase. The number of reports will increase because, again, not because it happens more often, but because we're hearing about it more often and we're getting a more clear picture of how often it happens. And then the goal, of course, is that the numbers will go down because we are stopping it from happening. And one of the ways that will happen is that having a clearer picture helps us to identify patterns and helps us to identify issues in particular schools, in particular grade levels, and helps us to to address those right away, and not and not wait until the problem gets worse. We have had those instances. So far this year, we've had instances where we've identified patterns in the middle schools where a lot of harassment about a particular issue is happening in the hallways. And we can work with those schools to start addressing those issues right away. And so I think that the data side of this, the gathering of information and using that information to help drive decisions is a very exciting part of this. Excuse me. Additional prevention strategies in our schools will include working with our community partners in educating students and staff about bias and sexual violence and privilege and many of the issues that make our schools less equitable, and things that we should be paying attention to. That will include stronger education about consent, about bodily autonomy, and healthy relationships between students. We'll work closely with student groups who are working to change the climate in their schools. That includes student leadership. It includes Black student unions, gay straight alliances, any organizations that are working to increase equity in their schools. I think student leadership is critical in this work. And then finally, on a systems level, creating the expectation among staff that incidents of bias are something that we need to act on right away, no matter how small. Whether it's use of hate speech in the hallway, whether it is harassment through social media, whether it's jokes that are inappropriate, those all add up for students who are experiencing them. And we as a system need to address that right away.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Finally, just in terms of, in addition to the specific strategies Kate's naming around trying to prevent discrimination, harassment, and sexual harassment, we wanted to just share some of the overall strategies that we are continuing to develop and implement with our schools across all schools to make schools safe and equitable for all students. So that includes, continuing to kind of build a collective mindset and skill to deepen relationships between students and amongst students and staff that ensures a sense of belonging for all students. So ways that shows up includes, the continued implementation of our Portland Promise Point person. For elementary students, that's generally, their classroom teacher who they have the strongest relationship with. In both our middle schools and high schools, that's the ongoing implementation of our advisory systems. So it's called different things. It might be called Crew. It might be called Lion's Pride. It might be called Seminar. But each of our secondary schools has a structure that they're continuing to grow to support that. We're growing the work around restorative practices and de-escalation to be able to have our communities be one that are not oriented around discipline and kind of punitive measures, but help to work through issues that arise and use them as opportunities to learn and grow and build stronger communities over time. And finally, at a system level across all of our schools, continuing to have the right structures that develop meaningful connection for students. So we have been working for a number of years in our schools around what we call PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Systems. So, and focusing on, student support teams working together to identify and support individual students that may need help, showing and demonstrating the kinds of behaviors we want in our schools. as it says here, the body of this presentation, rolling out and beginning implementation of our harassment and discrimination policy. And then also strengthening, paying particular attention to those big moments in a student's academic career when they transition from elementary to middle school and from middle school to high school, and how they enter and get supports in those early years as they're in middle school and the freshman year in high school to be able to position them for success. Research shows those are the most critical moments in a student's career to be able to have long-term success and graduate prepared and empowered. And lastly, across all of our strategies, we continue to do work like through Parent Use and through other outreach through our Communications and Multilingual Center to recognize and respond to voices of students and other traditionally unrepresented parents in the development and ongoing refinement of these strategies. So I like to think that the call to action that our community group came forward to us and to our school board in the fall of 2019 was a call to do that, to recognize and respond to those voices, to build out a policy that would be more supportive of students and help over time to create environments that are free from discrimination, harassment, and sexual harassment. So thank you all for being with us tonight. We'd like to take our last bit of time to answer and respond to any kind of questions. If you can, we're going to use the chat feature for people to post questions. And we'll take a little bit of time this evening to be able to talk about those questions, respond to any of them, and we'll share some of the links that we mentioned earlier in the presentation there as well.
So the first question is, what demographic data are currently being collected on discipline of students? Which students are getting detentions and suspensions? If this data is collected, how will we know if there is not collected? How will we know if there is bias? I think those are very good questions, and certainly questions that we are asking internally.
And as the superintendent posted there, we, at our last board meeting, and I think posted the link, we have been monitoring our suspension data, for the past number of years around a number of those protected categories, particularly race, and many of our schools. So that is an ongoing focus. Additionally, for lesser offenses or lesser disciplinary outcomes, many schools use a system that's referred to as SWIS, where we track the data of what kind of behavior incidents are happening, when they're happening during the day, who they're happening to, and that allows us to look at issues around, race and gender, to be able to analyze where we may be seeing problems. There was another question of, are you finding any of these cases happening mostly student to student or between teachers / adults and students, or both?
I think that we are seeing both. I would say that the majority of the reports that I have received are student to student, and that can run the gamut from inappropriate words or hate speech in the hallway to ongoing harassment to assaults. But we are seeing most of the reports that I've received are students to student. There have been some reports about teachers and adults in the building. And then there also have been reports from parents challenging the way that an administrator has addressed a conflict between two students or behavior between two students. And that is something that we will follow up on as well.
Emma, anything you'd like to add from your kind of school level seat to that question in terms of how you've been experiencing, what students have been coming to you with?
Sure. I would echo that it's both. I represent one school, but I know that from my seat, I think in my opinion, at least between students, it's quite direct. The harassment is quite direct, whereas from staff to students, it could be a little bit more indirect. Some of these microaggressions we talk about and bias and things like that. And as staff, we definitely have conversations about how to be humble and learn from our mistakes and move forward as better educators for our students. So yeah, I would definitely echo that it's both, and the instances just sort of vary between students and staff, I would say.
Thanks, Emma. Just a comment, for everybody and to share in the translation. It'd be great to create a district-wide summit of the civil rights teams. Could the liaisons be tapped to coordinate? So that's, a wonderful thought. We're certainly, as we have kind of been working through the staff rollout, focusing on kind of student engagement as, part of the next phase of our work. So that, is a great idea. And I think there are a number of leaders in addition to our liaisons that could help facilitate that. And we're also establishing for the first time through my colleague, through a couple of our district colleagues, Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally, and the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Barrett Wilkinson, starting a student advisory panel. So we have a few structures, and I agree it would be great to bring students together around some of these issues across schools.
I agree. I think that the student leadership on these issues will be tremendously important as we try to make the systems change that we need to prevent this from happening. At this point, a lot of the work that I've been doing has been building the systems and responding to reports. But the goal is that eventually we're going to get to be able to be more proactive around this policy in particular, and working with student leaders to have those important discussions and to start thinking about how we change culture at school.
We're happy to hang on for a few more minutes. We know that everybody has a lot going on, so really appreciative of the group that's joined us this evening. There is, I'll call out, and Nanette, if you want to speak to it at all, there's the link to the evaluation for tonight's session. So appreciate that, folks taking a moment to just give us some feedback on tonight's session, how we can continue to provide information about this topic specifically, but in general, what other topics, in terms of serving our families and community through parent university events might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add that we have recorded the session. It will be posted through our district's YouTube channel, on our parent university website, as well as any other related documents. The link for the Speak Up website will be there as well.
So there's a question just as well for translation about how many participants we had this evening. So we had, over 30 participants kind of at the peak of engagement and participation tonight. I don't remember exactly what the highest number was. Over 30 something, sorry, to clarify. I don't think it ever went to 40. Yeah, thank you, Juliana. 38. I wasn't sure of the exact number. Thank you again for everybody's participation this evening. It's a pleasure to be able to share this work with this group, and we look forward to you sharing this with all of your connections and colleagues in the community. And as Kate said, we definitely see it as a sign of progress to be able to continue to know about these reports, and be able to start to address them as we move towards creating a safe and welcoming environment for every student in our community. So thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.